was always the Jags.
Always the Jags.
It's always the Jags.
Always the Jags.
Welcome back into Always the Jags, your number one podcast for all things Jacksonville, all things Jaguars, all things Duval. Preseason game against the Steelers. Our first look at the Jaguars in actual action, after the scrimmage. The endless summer full of training camp bites while we tried to get excited over people making, pretty cool catches, but also really just waiting and hankering for football. And we finally got our first taste. And let's just say the results were lackluster. Now, Steelers are a good team. Steelers have been a good team to me, that's the perfect team to go against because they're not a powerhouse, right? But if we want to compete for the division, if we want to be as good as we are, the Steelers are kind of the line. It's almost like there used to be an Andy Dalton line in the NFL, right? Where if your quarterback was better than Andy Dalton, you had a great quarterback. If he was worse than Andy Dalton, you had a bad quarterback. That's the Steelers right now in the NFL. It's the way they've been for the past since they last won a Super Bowl, right? If you can beat the Steelers, if you could consistently beat the Steelers, you were a contender. If you can't beat the Steelers, you're not a contender. They've had a winning season, but it's always been like 9-8, maybe 10-7, but just barely squeaking in the playoffs or missing the playoffs, had a winning season, but they've been very, very average. Steelers feel like they've been average for the last 5 years. But again, consistently delivering winning seasons. So if you can beat the Steelers, okay, you can make noise in the playoffs. You're maybe a contender. If you can't beat the Steelers, you're not. This game showed us, and so where I would expect the Jaguars to go is I would want us to be toe-to-toe with the Steelers, right? Even if we lost a close game, we should be able to go toe-to-toe with them. And again, that was a small sample size, but that's not what I saw on the preseason game. Going against the Steelers' second-string defense, we got 3 points. Now, it's not terrible, but a penalty killed the drive, and I would have sent the starters back out there to go get a touchdown because you're going against a second-string defense, which means, scheme means a lot, and the Steelers have a good defensive scheme, but if you're going against a team's second-string defense, you should be able to consistently move up and down the field against them because essentially that is the worst defense in the NFL. If it's the team's second string defense, because none of those players are starters on any other team. So at the very best, they are the 33rd ranked defense in the league. At the very best for a second string defense. And we got one penalty and that killed our drive and we had to settle for a field goal. And now maybe I would have been satisfied offensively if that's what I saw. Okay, we got a penalty that happens. We will, sometimes penalties can kill drives, and that's why it's so important to clean those up. But those things happen. Okay, let's flush it and move on. And maybe you could have taken them off the field if your first string defense did its job. The first string defense gave up a touchdown to the second string offense on the Steelers. So again, if our defense can't stop the 33rd ranked offense in the league, stop them from driving up and down the field and getting a touchdown, that means we couldn't stop the worst offense from scoring. That's a big problem because that was our first string defense and that was their second string offense, right? Darnell Washington's a big guy. Mason Rudolph has experience, but they're not that good, right? There are a lot of teams that have a lot of depth, but if you can't beat the second stringers on a team, your team is not good enough, or your coordinator or something is not working, and it has to be majorly evaluated. Now, I'd like to say maybe it was it's hard to say it was fluky because we were seeing some of the same errors that we saw last year, some of the same mental mistakes, some of just the same not being there in assignments and just letting them march up and down the field. And again, the worst part is the Steelers got the exact same penalty that the Jaguars got. Exact same penalty. Exact same penalty, and they overcame it and still scored a touchdown. So if I'm the head coach, I'm looking at that and I'm saying, oh, okay, my offense needs to go back out there and get a touchdown. And you're done when you get a touchdown. Because if their second string offense could overcome a 10-yard penalty to put 7 points on the board against our first place defense, against our first string defense, why couldn't our first string offense do the same against their second string defense? Even if both allowed touchdowns, why was theirs able to get more than we were? Now, everybody's saying it's just preseason, but, and it is, but like, those are our players still. That's the team that we're going to see on Sundays in those first two drives. And we didn't need to necessarily dominate, but that's not something any Jags fan wanted to see. So those are big questions. It's big questions for Anthony Campanelli's scheme. You know, there were some guys that were in zone coverage, and I believe it was a 1st and 20. He picked up like 17 yards on the first play. 1st and 20, completed a pass for 17. That's not good. That's not going to get us where the team expects us to go. And I don't necessarily think it's hard for me to pinpoint what it is, but I don't feel like we don't have the players to make that happen. I don't necessarily feel like it's the roster, because on paper, we should have the right players to make that happen. But, we'll see. So that has me worried, that reasonably has me very worried, the higher that this Travis pick goes that we traded to the Browns, the more games that we lose, the worse the trade is going to look, because the better the pick is going to be for the Browns. So there's a lot to consider. Hopefully things will get better. I hope Anthony Campanelli, takes some time and redefines his scheme. Because if I was him, I would be pissed. I don't know if you'd be pissed at the players if they weren't executing their scheme, or I'd be pissed at myself for not making a scheme that's easy to execute. But somebody should be pissed about that. And it shouldn't just be Jags fans, is my only point. Secondly, stand out from the preseason game, Cam Little is a beast. Cam Little is a beast. He is a beast. He knocked out a 70-yard field goal. 70-yard field goal. That is technically not an NFL record because it's in the preseason, but if it wasn't, it would be in the record. And he had room to spare. Like, it didn't just barely go in. I think it would have been good from 74, maybe even 75. So I love the way he tweeted, "Don't worry, guys, there's going to be more." So at least we can say we got our kicker, right? And again, he wasn't even necessarily the guy that I wanted in the draft from last year, but he's proven himself to be fantastic. And so, again, I love being wrong. Like I said, if I pick a guy and then another guy ends up standing out, I love being wrong. And so if we go back over to the defense again, I would need to see how the Falcons play in preseason, and I need to take some look at that too. But if I'm looking at that defensive performance, I don't think taking Caleb Branshaw over Xavier Watts is the right choice based upon just that defensive performance. I mean, Caleb Branshaw didn't even play, right? And it's not like Xavier Watts could come in and transform and save the defense. But our safeties looked out of place, and especially because it appears like they want to do lots of 3 and 4 safety looks. But our safeties, they just constantly looked out of place, And right now, it looks like we're going to have Wingard and Eric Murray starting. And Wingard is good, but you don't really want him starting for the whole season. You kind of want him to be a placeholder. So that's why I still think Xavier Watts is probably the right choice. And if we were planning on doing more safety sets, maybe even getting Malachi Moore, that's the room that I'm most concerned about going into the season. And again, we couldn't have fixed it all in one off season. We signed a guy, and there's some other things that we would have needed to do. You can't, completely fix it. But I think a long start would have been drafting a guy like Xavier Watts over Caleb Branshaw. And taking Branshaw later, right? Because Travis Etienne looked good. Tanks Bigsby looked good. If you told me that we could have, I would have rather come away from the draft with 3 safeties than come away with 2 running backs. So if I take Xavier Watson the third, and then instead of Bhayshul Tuten, I take I just had if I take Ransaw in the 4th round over Bhayshul Tuten, maybe even over Jack Kaiser. I mean, Jack Kaiser made some plays, but again, our linebacker position, we have is pretty deep. It's pretty deep, and Xavier Watts feels like he would have been more helpful. Like I would have preferred taking them both. If you had to choose between that, again, taking why take a line when you have safeties and you're not really sure exactly who's starting? Why take another linebacker when you're starting 3 are pretty much already set? Devin Lloyd, Ventrell Miller, and Foye Oluokun. And even Yasir Abdullah appears to have moved up the depth chart ahead of Ventrell Miller. We still have Chad Muma, which still makes the Jack Kaiser pick look like why? When again, there's a very clear need at safety. So like you don't need to throw stuff at the wall with linebacker. You need to throw stuff at the wall with safety. That's the more pressing need. And maybe Foye won't be here, and maybe they're preparing for Devin Lloyd not being here next year, and I get that, and that makes sense. Chad Muma will probably be gone too. But that's next year. We got problems this year. Like we're not the luxury of we're not at the point of luxury where we can okay, we'll just do that next year. Like we need guys that can start and potentially be starters this year, so that decision, the more our defense struggles, the more that draft decision is going to look worse. And of course, the better Xavier Watts. Now he might suck, and I could be eating my words, right? But either way, Bhayshul Tuten had a nice moment. I always love seeing all the players rally around a guy and get him in the end zone. To me, that just builds your team so much, and it really builds the camaraderie. And I love seeing the way the team celebrated after that 70-yard field goal. And again, preseason doesn't matter. Winning or losing doesn't matter. But I would have loved to see if that fired everyone else up enough to go get the win. But there was a couple of mistakes, Eli Pancol had a couple of mistakes that kind of led to the clock running out and all this kind of thing. So, a win wasn't in the books for the preseason. And again, we always want to see the Jaguars win, but we also know it truly does not matter. So we'll have to, again, assess there about that draft decision, and that might be something that haunts us throughout the season if the secondary continues to struggle the way it has, because it has struggled a lot. And if I'm not mistaken, Xavier Watts is already atop the Falcons depth chart at safety. So I'm gonna keep going back to it because he was projected to be a 2nd rounder. Getting him in the 3rd would have been such a steal. So LaQuinn Allen had a couple of nice plays I saw, and he did pretty well. He had some nice pass protection. I'm surprised that Travis Etienne ended up being number 1 on the depth chart, and Tank Bigsby mainly ran with the 2s. Because I still think we also used Travis Etienne a little bit more in a scat back role. I don't know if they were faking the handoff to him, but it was kind of just a quick shovel pass, and he got that acceleration out there, and he was able to. So it shows that Travis Etienne still has a place in this offense, and I still think that's the right place for him, right? Let Tank Bigsby be the thumper. Let Tank Bigsby kind of be the number 1 back to pick up those blitzes and stuff. But when Trevor needs to get out of a jam, he can, drop it off to Travis Etienne, or let Travis Etienne run some routes. There's all kinds of things that he could do, kind of, but more in a scat back role, shifty, and then let Tank Bigsby be more of the hammer. And I think if you're your hammer is usually the one that should start, because in general, hammers are bigger at picking up blitzes, because a shifty back is not going to stop a defensive end. But a bigger back can. He can block or pick up a blitz. Now, if it's a smaller safety, Travis Etienne might be able to pick it up. But again, Tank Bigsby, it's not going to be hard for him to pick it up. Now, the guy might get around Tank Bigsby a little bit easier. But again, usually when it's a blitz, it's easier to pick it out and just be ready in front of Trevor. So all that to say, it was kind of it was an underwhelming preseason performance, I gotta admit. But with some highlights, again, we didn't get to see much of Travis Hunter. I think he had 1 catch, and then on defense, still getting used to it. Someone made a great play on Brian Thomas Jr. That was really surprising. Because Brian Thomas Jr. he was about to catch a pass, and then he got lit up in a almost defenseless receiver hit, but it wasn't. He hit him in the right way. It was almost that way, but it wasn't. It was just a good defensive play. I don't think Trevor saw the safety running up from behind. I think the safety had to start running towards Brian Thomas Jr. before the ball was out of his hand, and I just don't think Trevor saw that. Or maybe he did and just thought he could still get the ball there before the safety got there. So that one I wouldn't necessarily blame Brian Thomas Jr. on. I mean, he's focusing on constant catching the ball, and then wham, just gets smacked. But I do feel like a guy like Brenton Strange would have held on to that. And again, Brenton Strange continues to show out and is showing good moves in camp and on the field in preseason action. Watching Darnell Washington catch that massive human being catch that touchdown, makes me wish we had him on our team. But it is what it is. We don't. And I still think Brenton Strange is going to be good and is a good player for us. But overall, let me know what you thought about our week 1 preseason performance. Excited to get back to Jaguars football. You looking forward to the season? Do you think there's a lot of work still to be done? All of this to say, I don't think we're going to, I'm not worried about us facing the Panthers. Let me get this straight, with my criticisms over the way we handled the Steelers. I'm not necessarily worried about the Panthers because, again, the Steelers have a much better organization. You could argue the Steelers 2s might even be able to beat the Panthers 1s on a couple of drives here and there. But it's just we don't like this year being the best of all the bad teams is not good enough. And that's kind of where we are. But we need to at least ascend to average by the year's end in order for the trade to look like it makes sense and maybe even make the playoffs. We don't have to be a contender to make the playoffs. All we have to do is really be average. And if you look at the NFL power rankings, every team that we're ranked above, we're ranked 22nd. Our schedule is not that difficult. It's not that easy either. It's kind of right in the middle. But basically, when people wonder, why do you say the Jaguars are going 10-7? If you look at the NFL power rankings, there's only 3 or 4 teams that I picked us to beat that are ahead of us on the power rankings, right? The Seahawks are a little bit higher, the Cardinals are a little bit higher, and the Texans are a little bit higher. And there's someone else. But other than that, all the other teams that I said we should get, if we're going to get to 10 wins, Titans, Colts, Jets, a lot of those teams are all below us. Panthers on the power rankings. So if we do what we're supposed to do, there's easily at least 8 wins there, just from teams that were better than on the power rankings. And then if we're able to reach and elevate, because there's still unknowns, we're going to go as far as Travis Hunter and Liam Coleman can take us. If we're able to reach and beat a couple of teams ahead of us, next thing you know, we're at 10 wins, maybe even cruising into the postseason. So it's not that, the goal, the standard that we need to set is not realistic. It's not unrealistic. But we got to play better than we did at the preseason. And we definitely cannot regress. Regression will hurt tremendously. We have to at least meet the expectations that we have. At least meet them. And then maybe supersede them here and there as the team gets better. So again, let me know your thoughts on the preseason week 1 versus the Steelers. Are you excited about the Jaguars? Are you nervous? Are you excited about Travis Hunter? All of that. And tune in next time to Always the Jags.